Welcome to the All About GTM Podcast, where I invite thought leaders in my network to spill the tea on everything go-to-market. I'm your host, Jade Maravillas. Today I'm joined by Alan Bunce, better known as the Enterprise PMM. Alan spent decades shaping go-to-market strategy across startups, scale-ups, and global giants like Salesforce and IBM. We first met during our Demandware days, and he now runs his own consultancy, helping B2B SaaS companies sharpen their messaging and make product marketing a true growth driver. In this conversation, we dive into what really makes great product marketing, why clear messaging matters more than ever, and why CEOs, not just CMOs, should care deeply about product marketing. Alan also shares insights from his new book, breaking down 11 product marketing truths every company should hear. Hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I did recording it, but for now, here's Alan Bunce. Alan and I have known each other for a very long time, but we kind of dipped in and out. I met you maybe about a decade ago now, and then we went our separate ways. But then when I started thinking about going into consultancy, I looked into my virtual Rolodex, aka LinkedIn, to see who's gotten into that path. And I remember that you have pivoted your career from being an in-house enterprise PMM / product marketing leader to the enterprise PMM. And product marketing and go-to-market are, I would say, interchangeable, so to speak. And in some capacities, are the same function, and in some may not be as well. So let's talk a little bit about that on our podcast. But first, I was looking through your LinkedIn and I was really curious. A lot of the product marketing managers that I know, most of them have other professional histories before going into product marketing. I think you're probably the only one that I know that started out their career in product marketing and has stayed in this. So true veteran of the field. Is that correct? Or am I just basing it off what LinkedIn says?
Yeah, good question. And first of all, again, like you, I feel it's great to be back together again, chatting. You think we used to get together, in interesting places like Hong Kong and Singapore, and now this is the modern way, which is to do it through the screen. But it's great to be together. And I also agree that product marketing, or PMM, as you might call it, is interlocked with the idea of go-to-market or GTM. And in fact, as a consultant, you got to name your business. I named mine Enterprise PMM, partly because enterprisegtm.com was already taken, right? But, it definitely could have been either. To answer your question, I think when I lay out my career on LinkedIn anyway, I'm probably hiding a little bit of age, right? Because actually my career goes back before being a product marketer.
Uh-huh.
I started my career during the roaring .com boom of the 1990s, or as my daughters would call it, like the Stone Age. It's like, Dad, did they have cars back then? Get kind of age, right? Wearing all sorts of different hats like you do at startups, doing all sorts of, fun but slightly crazy things. And, then after that, kind of ran away to business school for a couple of years, like a lot of people do, and came out and said, all right, trying to find something a little more respectable to do. And, product marketing wound up being it. So a little bit of both, I think, is the answer. I've been doing it a long time. In fact, I just talked to somebody recently, a younger product marketer, who said, I didn't even know there was product marketing 20 years ago. But yep, there definitely was. But I've even done some things before that.
And so first of all, there was like an aha moment there, because I thought you were the unicorn in the bunch. So what was your background then before you got into product marketing?
Well, yeah, again, I'd say it was a little bit of the wear many hats kind of roles that you have at startups, right? And actually, I think there's a career lesson that I wind up sharing with people who are trying to either get into or get ahead in their career of product marketing, which is a lot of people do work that is essentially product marketing work without having that title. And so I usually say to people, if you're trying to, again, get ahead or get into it, make sure it's clear of the things you've done that are similar to product marketing. And that was true in my case as well. These startups where I did a lot of different things, but a lot of it was about kind of communicating what the business was doing, or trying to figure out how to message what the business was doing, how to influence various audiences, nominally wearing other hats, in terms of my title and whatnot, but really doing a lot of what is fundamentally product marketing work. It wasn't like a totally foreign territory for me when I actually got my first real product marketing job. And I think that's probably true of a lot of people in a lot of different fields, is they're doing product marketing work maybe without even realizing it.
So let's take a step back. What is product marketing?
Yeah, good question, right? And one that probably there should be one nice crisp answer to. I think there's a lot of answers out there, and a lot of them are not very good, if you ask me. First of all, I see a lot of people trying to define product marketing and using words that frankly make product marketing almost indistinguishable from just like the business as a whole. You know, it's like, oh, product marketing is about developing the right products, identifying the right customers, bringing them to market, you know, in a way that's profitable and blah, 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 blah. You know, and I say to myself, well, that's like the whole business, you know, like what's your particular slice of it? I remember a bunch of years ago now where I was, I think what today they'd call founding PMM, and that I joined a small company and I was the first product marketer. I had to sort of explain to everybody what product marketing is. And the best way I came up with to describe it, which is still what I use today, which is to say the nature of product marketing is to understand and articulate the value of the product. And it's short and sweet. So hopefully that's an advancement over a lot of definitions out there. And each of those words is chosen carefully, right? It's like it's understanding the value. You know, you're not building the product or anything like that, but you got to make sure you really understand it. It's understanding the value, right? So not just the features and what it does, but like what's the value to the buyer of the product, and then articulating or, you know, communicating. And even that sort of slightly nerdy word choice is deliberate, right? Because you're not always the one who literally communicates the value of the product. Sometimes you're helping the sales team communicate it or the marketing team communicate it, but you're kind of articulating it, and that you're helping to find the words and the messages maybe that others will use to go and communicate it. So that combination, understanding and articulating, I think that is my definition. The best one that I've found others use to define, or the best definition I've heard others use to define product marketing, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was so catchy, but it was something like, know the customer, know the product, put them together, find the magic. That's catchier than mine, right? But I think it's sort of the same concept.
I've worked in some companies where product marketing sat in product, and in other companies it sat in marketing, right? Tell me, what makes a great PMM, not a good one, a great one? And is there a right answer as to where that person should have their capabilities more aligned to, product or marketing?
Yeah, it's the age-old debate that probably will never die. And first of all, I mean, what I always said to product marketers that work for me is, if the way we do our job or how well we do our job depends upon who we report to, like we're all doing something wrong, like that just shouldn't matter. But I think it is a great debate. I tend to lean more towards the marketing side than the product side, but I'm not sure there's any right or wrong. As to what makes a good product marketer, I mean, here's where I always think of a kind of a snarky comment that an old physics teacher of mine used to use. He would always say, and this is probably going to insult other scientists, but he used to say, to be a biologist, you have to be able to memorize. To be a chemist, you have to be able to multiply and remember how much a mole is. But to be a physicist, you must be able to think. That's what he used to say. And I feel like there's a little bit of that in product marketing, right? Which is, I'm not going to, recreate the whole sentence with other jobs because I don't want to insult other jobs, but it certainly ends with the line that to be a product marketer, you need to be able to think, and if you just consider even that simple definition I just gave of product marketing, understanding and articulating the value of the product, there's a lot of thinking in there, right? So I think fundamentally it comes down to just being a good thinker, but of course, there's other skills. You have to be able to communicate, you have to have some facility with numbers to kind of understand pricing and markets and that sort of thing. You need to be able to work with people. I need to be able to understand things, quickly. But I think being a good thinker, as vague as that is really the essential quality.
And what would the difference between someone who is a product marketer versus someone who focuses on other types of marketing? Like, what are the differences in terms of skill sets and roles and responsibilities that you've seen as in your time?
Yeah, good question. I guess I would think of it in terms of, I think of other marketing jobs as being vital and hard, obviously. So I'm not at all trying to say they're not thinkers, right? But I do think it tends to be a little bit more sort of understanding the sort of the functional role that they're playing. Like I always love working with marketers who effectively say, I don't think they've ever actually said this, but they effectively might turn to me and say, hey, I don't care what we're marketing, whether it's enterprise software or shoes or, industrial equipment or whatever. Like you tell me, who we're trying to market to, what we're selling them, what the value is, what they care about. And I will tell you how to, whether to send emails or to do ads or to do events or whatever. Like I know how to reach people and to engage them. I just need help understanding who we're going after and what we're going after. So, I think that's the right kind of division of labor between product marketing and other functions, and the same things, other marketing functions. And the same is true for functions outside of sales, right? No product marketer I've ever met is as good of a salesperson as a good salesperson, right? But they can go to salespeople and say, you're good at selling. I can tell you who we're going after, what the value is, what they care about, and then you do your thing. And that's kind of the dynamic I always look for as a product marketer working with people in other roles.
And would you argue that if someone was a fantastic all-around marketer, or on the flip side, from a product standpoint, as a product manager, actually knows and understands their customers, that there is still a need for a separate function such as product marketing?
Yeah, you're getting at a sort of a wise guy comment I sometimes make, which is that product marketing is a function that theoretically should not need to exist. It's it's like it would be great if marketers who are experts in their craft, could also understand, again, the customer and the product and whatnot really well. Or if product managers who are building the product could turn around and just as well articulate all the value stuff we just talked about. Or salespeople could just hear the product details and then craft their own sales pitches, right? So that's the perfect world, right? Where product marketing maybe doesn't need to exist, right? We're not living a perfect world from what I found. And so everybody needs some help, and so I think that's why product marketing exists. Because again, like it doesn't quite work that way. I sometimes describe product marketing, there are lots of metaphors you can use, right? Product marketers love metaphors, especially when they're talking about their own job, right? But one of them for me is like we're like the oil that makes the machinery pieces kind of grind together the way they should. Theoretically, you shouldn't need oil, right? But the reality is you need oil to make the machine run smoothly. So that's kind of what product marketing does.
Cool. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into your particular background as a product marketer. Looking at what your experience was listed here on LinkedIn, you started out your journey in Unica, is that correct? From
Unica,
a PMM
Unica,
standpoint.
Right.
And then you ended up at Demandware, which is how we met. And then from Demandware was famously purchased by Salesforce. And this was around like in the mid 2010s, I believe, or mid to late 2010s.
Yeah, that's right. 2016.
Having to work in such large organizations such as that, especially ending up in one of the biggest ones in the world from a SaaS standpoint, right? Salesforce. Can you give us any lessons as to how the product marketing function can really contribute to a successful go-to-market and working across the different parts of the business, especially when you have a lot of different stakeholders?
Yeah, in going from sort of a mid-sized company into a large one is always an interesting experience. And I've done it a couple of times because before Salesforce, Unica was acquired by IBM, which back in those days felt a little bit like being acquired by the U.S. Social Security Administration or something, right? That's really big, really, really big, and I think certainly when you're acquired, product marketing becomes a little bit of a different animal than it was, or than it is, when you're on your own. Actually, it becomes almost like wearing two hats, right? Because immediately when you get acquired, the first thing they basically tell you is, don't screw anything up, right? Keep doing what you're doing. Your business has to keep growing as is. But then you have to do all the product marketing you're used to doing, but then you also have to turn around and do a lot more of what I'd call internal product marketing, which is kind of marketing your products to all the people inside the organization who are really going to add that extra fuel to the engine, if you will, to help you grow. And that's challenging, but an interesting challenge, right? Because it becomes less about, well, here's what our product does and what the value is, and more like, here's what the combination is, or here's what the value of the combination of the product that just got acquired and all the other pieces that already exist. Actually, when I got to Salesforce, that became my primary responsibility, was to go and kind of craft the story of how the old Demandware products could be combined with each of the other Salesforce clouds, or a lot of them together, to kind of tell this larger story. And then again, the first audience was not actually the customers or the prospects, but it was the internal Salesforce people to kind of get them excited about this combination. So, I mean, there's always some internal marketing involved when you're a product marketer, but it becomes even more so the case after you've been gobbled up by one of the big giants.
And how do you then, I guess the big old question is, how do you market to marketers?
Right. Good question. And I think, so first of all, I've done it in a couple different ways. Like back at Unica, for example, our target market was marketers, right? But it was B2C marketers, like big B2C marketers who had huge customer databases and needed serious technology to market to them. So in that case, it's like marketing to any other audience, right? You know, we were different kind of marketers at Unica because we were B2B marketers. So we just have to go and understand them, study them, learn from them, interact with them, figure out what they care about, figure out what value means to them, just like anybody else. I mean, other companies like the HubSpots of the world are selling to people just like themselves, and that's probably a little bit of a different animal. But selling to big B2C marketers, you know, is like selling to anybody else. But then the other part of it, like we're touching on here, is the idea of marketing your product within a larger company to the other marketers or product marketers of other products at that company and trying to get them excited about the combination. You know, and I think that's probably like, well, kind of like the world or the relationship in which we met, right? Which was as kind of partner to partners relationship, right? Which is you got to figure out how do you make 1 + 1 = 3, a way that excites everybody and makes everybody think this is worth prioritizing because there's a lot of promise here. It's like doing the same thing with external partners. You're just doing it internally this time.
I think one of the biggest success stories from an e-commerce platform standpoint was Demandware. Seeing it from the sidelines as a partner, like you mentioned, was really exciting. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how that journey was, being in the middle of that growth? And as I understand, were you one of the first, if not the first, product marketing person at Demandware?
Well, yeah, good guess, but you're giving me way too much credit. I think a phrase in the middle there is sort of where the story is, right? Because I came in, I think companies like Demandware back in those days were a little bit like a rocket ship, you know, and I would say I came in sort of after the rocket booster was ejected or something, right? It was already kind of, you know, halfway into the atmosphere, right? And so, again, I'll say something I said earlier in a different context. I think part of the mission coming in at that stage was like, don't screw anything up. Like, we're doing really well, don't screw anything up. Because there had been some good product marketers in place before I arrived, you know, and again, my first order of business was don't screw it up. But the other thing that was happening then, and again, this happens all the time at companies of all different shapes and sizes, was a little bit of a, not so much a pivot, but like an evolution, you know, of message and strategy and whatnot. I mean, the whole Demandware story up until the time I arrived was around the idea of being the first real cloud platform in commerce. You know, before then it was all installed software, ship the CD and tell them to buy their servers and good luck, right? But, you know, Demandware was the first one to do it in the cloud, and that story, you know, again, so we got the rocket ship up, you know, through the atmosphere, but to keep going to, you know, the moon or Mars or whatever the metaphor would be, it had to shift. And the shift was, first of all, it came by a bunch of acquisitions that hit just as I arrived, you know, and then that allowed the company to shift to more of what we called kind of a unified commerce story, you know, so not just e-commerce, but all these other pieces and kind of how they fit together. A little bit, again, like what we were talking about then happens after you get acquired, which is how does your stuff combine with all the other stuff that exists at the acquiring company? Well, this was sort of the opposite, right? We acquired these pieces. How do we tell this bigger story? So that kind of, not exactly reinvention, but sort of evolution was, you know, really what I was involved with when I arrived.
And fast forward to a few years after that, Demandware exits to Salesforce. You mentioned already a little bit how that transition was, going from I would say it's still quite a large, but more like a mid-sized company into a huge SaaS company. Tell me how that journey was, and also how that experience contributed to your trajectory as an independent consultant.
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, I mean, as with any acquisition, I think, or business transition, the first and probably biggest impact is cultural. You know, we all had to get used to the Salesforce culture, which is very distinct. I'll just put it that way. It's very distinct. And it's almost like, in retrospect, I feel like the first sniff test that was happening with all of us was, will we fit in or not? And if not, you know, and if you demonstrate you can fit in, well, then you can stay a while, right? So that was the first part of it. And that was interesting. But, you know, Salesforce was probably still is the proverbial 800-pound gorilla in, SaaS software marketing. So it was great just to be there. I mean, for me, in terms of the lasting impact, it's like I was able to see how the gorilla does it, and, as with any business, some things I think they did really well and succeeded because of those things. Some things, not so well, and they probably succeeded despite those things. And sometimes the because versus despite, line is hard to distinguish, but it just was great to see what that looked like on the inside. And the other thing is, and this has probably been true forever, like when you've got a brand like Salesforce on your resume, even though I was only there like a year or so, everyone still looks at me as like, oh yeah, the former VP of product marketing at Salesforce. And I usually don't point out that A, it was a relatively short tenure, and B, there were lots of VPs of product marketing at Salesforce, right? If they want to pat me on the back for that, great, so that was certainly a lasting impact, But ultimately, it's like, I think when I became a self-employed consultant, like now I've literally seen everything, right? I've seen startups, I've seen mid-sized companies, I've seen mid-sized companies that really succeeded and went public and got acquired. I've seen mid-sized companies that kind of didn't really go anywhere, and I've been inside the biggest and the best companies. So like I've seen a little bit of everything, and I can sort of bring what I've seen to bear with clients in whatever way seems appropriate and helpful.
So you've been on this journey for the last 8 years, I think, right?
So yeah, self-employed. Yeah, coming up on 8, or I'm in my 8th, something like that. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you've worked with every size of company imaginable: startups, scale-ups, enterprise. I'm wondering, when does product marketing, at what stage of the company's life should product marketing be a separate function? When should it be in a company's life cycle, should it be a dedicated function rather than it being part of, say, jobs to be done or a role of someone else?
Yeah, I mean, it's another of the great debates, I would say, to which there's probably no right or wrong answer, and it'll never be a settled question, right? When do you bring in your first product marketer as a small company? I have what is probably a little bit of a contrarian view, in the sense that my experience has been at a lot of startups, the founders are basically doing their own product marketing, and it's highly unlikely that if they bring in, especially a sort of a junior or mid-level product marketer or whoever they can afford, that they're going to just say, okay, now you tell me what we should be saying to the market. Like, no, the founder's always going to be heavily involved in that. So, I mean, probably the right first hire is someone to more help fill the pipeline and let the founder keep doing their thing. I think the right moment to bring in product marketing, and where I often get brought in, is when, again, that sort of other type of marketer has been brought in to help sort of scale the pipeline, put the marketing infrastructure in place. But as the shift from founder-led sales to, kind of sales-led sales is happening, I think that's often the right moment to start to bring in product marketing, because that's when the founder starts to realize, I can't do every call myself. I can't even do every second of meeting myself. I need the sales team to be more independent. I need the marketing team to be more independent. But I need to clone myself, essentially, because I got too many other things to do. And that's where product marketing can come in, learn the story, refine the story, improve the story. More importantly, help scale the story. So I see product marketing as a fundamental to, maybe a more succinct way to put it would be fundamental to scale up, not always the right first hire for a startup. Although, again, it's a great debate. And, you could have other people on your podcast who would argue the opposite case. But that's been my experience anyway. Scale up. It's a key to scale up.
Or potentially, if you're a founder and you know how awesome your product is, but you're struggling to articulate it and find out who your ICP is probably a way to engage someone like yourselves to help them on that journey.
Well, yeah, good cue, and I appreciate it. I've missed the important self-serving plug here, right? Which is what is great for startups to do, is to hire a consultant, to come in and help, right? Because especially one with a little gray hair, if I may say,
been around the block.
Right? Exactly, because again, if things aren't working or they know it needs to be sharpened and improved, well, hiring someone full-time, especially if all they can afford is sort of a junior or mid-level person, probably isn't going to help that much, because that person may not have enough experience or be willing to push back or whatever. But these days, there are, frankly, a lot of people like me out there who you can hire as a consultant or as a freelancer or whatever you want to call it, to come in and give you some advice, help you sharpen it and improve it, get the story right, and then proceed with the pattern I described. Having your first full-time hire be someone who can help you fill the pipe. So there's definitely a role for, again, maybe I'll summarize in a more succinct way, product marketing is essential right from the beginning, whether that's the founder doing it on their own, getting some consulting help or whatever. A product marketing full-time hire may not necessarily be the right answer for a startup right from the beginning.
I also like that, you as a product marketer positioned yourself specifically as the Enterprise PMM. So tell me, what makes an Enterprise PMM different from any old PMM?
Yeah, well, if the first confession I would say is, quite honestly, there are a lot of product marketers out there now and a lot of product marketing consultants out there as well. And a lot of them sort of came up or have their experience at what I'd call more sort of B2B SaaS, selling to more mid-market and SMB. And I began to say, boy, I'm really just an enterprise guy. Is that at all relevant? And I began to realize, oh yeah, it is very relevant. In fact, so relevant that I should put that stamp on myself. I'm the enterprise guy compared to the others. So it went from sort of, a defensiveness to no, this is a good thing. This is a good thing. Because I do think there are some differences, and that could be, frankly, a whole podcast unto itself. But I mean, I think the way I'd probably sum it up is by saying, I think enterprise go-to-market, again, if I speak more broadly than just product marketing, is a little bit like business consulting at scale. And what I mean by that is I think with a lot of enterprise SaaS products, there's a transformational nature to the product. And so it's not just, I have a pain. Can you sell me a widget to go solve that pain? Great. I'm going to carry on with my job. But it's more like, this is going to change the business, right? And that's a different approach than, again, just selling a widget to solve a specific pain. And so I think that's true across the whole, kind of across the whole go-to-market spectrum, versus, and I'm probably going to way exaggerate here and perhaps insult, B2B SaaS, product marketing and go-to-market people. But best way I can summarize that is I got involved in real SaaS very early because back at Unica, we acquired a company in 2007, which was a pure SaaS vendor, almost unheard of at that time, selling to mid-market, small customers. And I remember the CEO used to say, our sales team doesn't really sell. They're more they do more what I'd call facilitated buying. Maybe today you'd call it order taking, right? And again, that's very different than enterprise, where you have to go in and almost consult with the buyer about the transformation that the product can help represent. And thus the product marketing that goes behind those two sales motions is very different as well. So that's kind of the gist of it.
And does it also relate to understanding the different personas within the buying teams that you're selling to, right? So especially within the space that we operate in, if you're selling to an enterprise, those buying teams will have different departments or different responsibilities that they look after within, say, technology or marketing or finance or operations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's... again, it sort of connects back to that idea of enterprise SaaS having a transformational element to it, right? Transformations are big and involve a lot of people, and thus the buying process involves a lot of people as well. And so the buying teams are much more complex, different personalities, different personas, again, versus a more mid-market B2B SaaS product where it could be that the buyer and the user are the same person. And especially if they can swipe a credit card to buy it, there's not necessarily much of a buying process involved. So that's the big difference. I'm trying to think, again, we love metaphors in product marketing. So it's kind of like buying a hammer versus hiring a contractor, right? One spouse can probably buy their choice of hammer without checking with the other spouse about what they bought, right? But you're certainly not going to hire a contractor without a lot of discussions involving almost everybody in the family, right? Same thing's true of enterprise SaaS versus B2B SaaS.
Before I get into your book, because I'm super excited about it, how can product marketing help shorten sales cycles or contribute to revenue a lot faster than if you just left salespeople on their own?
Well, yeah, good question. I mean, I think it comes back to what we were talking about before, right? Which is to be a good salesperson. Now, there's a lot you have to be able to do, a lot of skills you have to be able to do. And I think even the most effective salesperson probably don't have the time to study the market deeply, and develop and refine and experiment and test, messaging, or build all the content they need, or build all the, the sales tools they need, that sort of thing. And so I think that's where there's a little bit of a, flip side of the coin relationship between sales and product marketing, which is Sales is great at selling, and product marketing is great at kind of giving them what they need in order to be able to sell, right? And that's what, and I think for salespeople, and I've seen salespeople at companies where they're struggling with product marketing, and they feel like salespeople feel like they have to do it all themselves, and they don't have the bandwidth to do it all, right? So it struggles. They struggle, right? So that's how I think product marketing plugs in and helps to accelerate, the sales cycle. But then, of course, I mean, the other thing I'd point out about product marketers is they're usually the only marketers in the company that are working the full funnel, from top to bottom, and so trying to help everybody from the folks driving interest at the top of the funnel to the middle, trying to convert it to things that the sales team wants to pursue. And so helping accelerate and drive revenue is partly helping the sales team, but it's also kind of helping everybody up and down the funnel, not trying to do their job for them, right? Because everyone's good at their job at their stage in the funnel, but trying to bring that contribution that product marketing can brings to every step of that customer journey throughout the funnel.
Fantastic. Okay, so just looking at some of the topics that you have in your book relates very nicely into a couple of topics within that. Maybe I'm jumping a few steps into number 10, which is funnel analysis can make the customer journey suck less. I mean, I totally get it, but can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, great. So first of all, just for context, you're referring to this book I put together about product marketing from long career, as you pointed out, right? And I tried to make each lesson sound a little bit more interesting than it might have otherwise. And that one, funnel analysis can help make the customer journey suck less. Hopefully it gets people's attention. First of all, I've already made one of the points that is behind that lesson, which is the idea that product marketing needs to worry about the whole funnel, right? You're not just sales support. You're not just, lead gen. You're not just, conversion or whatever. Like, you work the whole funnel. So, that's sort of the first lesson. But I also think the best product marketers, and really anyone involved in go-to-market, are the ones who care about the customer, care about making the customer's life better. The best way to approach trying to improve the whole go-to-market process is to think of it less selfishly in terms of, okay, how do we earn more revenue? That is obviously the end goal. But if you can think of it in terms of, if a customer is trying to accomplish something, we've got something that can help. How can we make it as easy as possible for them to find, and to buy this thing that we think will really help them? That's kind of the point, right? If the journey sucks, well, then you should be sympathetic to the customer and say, how can I make it suck less? If they're looking for the right answer at the top of the funnel, how can we make it clear that we should be considered? If they're trying to decide whether to get serious, how can we give them the information they need so they can move forward? If they're trying to buy, especially usually deep in the funnel, the champion wants to buy and needs help sort of selling internally. Well, how can we make it easier for them to go and convince everybody else of the value of this thing, right? So if you sort of approach it with a sympathetic, view towards the customer, making their lives better even during the buying process, I think that's sort of the right attitude.
And I think that also stems from the fact that, a big part of product marketing, but I also think not just product marketing, but a big part of our jobs serving customers should be actually talking to customers and understanding what the customer journey is, because I've sat in organizations where you have a hypothetical view of what the customer journey should be, but the reality is very different from what our hypotheses are.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no such thing as interacting too much with the market. I mean, that's essential. And that's, I think, probably folks like you and me, that's the part that we enjoy the most, is interacting with customers and prospects and understanding what people's lives are like and how we can make them better and that sort of thing. That's what it's all about.
Great. So speaking of product marketing musings, I have the 11 in front of me, but I think for us to touch on every single one would probably take us a whole hour altogether.
Sure, yeah.
Let me read them out one by one, and then I can tell you what my favorite one is.
Good. That's great. Let's do that.
I'd love to hear yours. Okay. So first is CEOs, not just CMOs, should care about product marketing. The second one is the best product messaging isn't about the product. Definitely at the top of my list there. Third one, pick the right market or the wrong one will pick you. I think I want to learn a little bit more about that. So let's park it on the side. You only have one buyer persona that matters. Interesting. The fifth one, the right pricing always feels a bit wrong. Controversial. I love that. All right, let's park that too. When it comes to competitive intelligence, less is more. Seventh one is salespeople are force multipliers. I think we've already spoken a little bit about that. The eighth is most marketers try to do each other's jobs while doing their own badly. That's hilarious. Okay, I probably will need a part 2 to this podcast.
We hit a little bit of that one already, right? That one's just about let everyone do their job, and don't try and do their job for them, that sort of thing.
Fantastic. Ninth, product should be the tail, not the dog, of product launches. Interesting.
That might be, I don't know if that's an Americanism, right? But that's sort of building on a joke somewhere about, like, does the dog wag the tail or does the tail wag the dog? That sort of thing.
And we spoke about funnel analysis. And then the last one is the worst evangelist in the company should be the product marketer. Ooh, all right, cool. Okay, so first, my picks are best product messaging isn't about the product. Something that I've been evangelizing about for a very long time, but also something that I'm currently doing in practice. I feel like in my consultancy, I do attract a lot of technical founders that are fantastic at building product. But then when you go onto the website, it's a reflection of exactly that. They're fantastic at building product, but that doesn't necessarily translate into making their prospective customer realize that by basically just talking about the product.
Yeah, that's right. And again, maybe we should consider this the speed round part of the podcast, right? Where I'll give you the short version of some of these things, right? Yeah, I think at the enterprise SaaS level, really the point there is, I think the best companies, and I got examples in the book, everyone probably can come up with their own examples, are companies that seem to be marketing less of a product and more of a point of view. Like, this is what our target market needs to be doing differently because of this big change that's occurring. So it's almost like they're marketing the point of view. And then it's like, oh yeah, we also have a product to help you make that change. But really it's about the change that needs to be made, right? So that's sort of the version there. Again, especially with transformational enterprise SaaS products. There's probably a B2B SaaS version of this, which is more like focus on the problem you're solving, not on the actual product. But that's what I mean by that one.
And how do you change the minds of these more technical founders or people that are very much like, my product is awesome, it will sell itself? Yeah,
well, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, I think you have to wait until they begin to realize it's not selling itself. And that's part of the reason why I say a full-time product marketer may not be the right first hire, right? Because I think sometimes founders need to struggle a little bit before they realize, oh, I have a problem here that needs fixing. Because the reality is, in the very early days of a startup, usually the founder can get some sales. I'm deal with this with startups I work with now. We're like, they'll get some sales and they'll say, this is great, everything's working. But so it's not till they try and scale it a little bit that they begin to realize, like, what worked for those first 3 or 4 is not going to work with everybody. I need help.
The other one that really struck me was pick the right market or the wrong one will pick you. Any stories behind that?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a little bit of a play on the idea of the importance of product market fit, right? Which everyone obviously gets really excited about. But I think the concern is, like, sometimes, especially like if you're in the early stages of a product, you find a customer who's really excited about the product, but wants to kind of redirect what it does or use it in some obscure use case. And you sort of think, oh, that's great. Like, they want to give us a lot of money for that. Let's go in that direction. And then you do it, you turn around, you realize, oh, but they're like only 2 other companies in the world that want to use it the same way. And so now we're in this market that, like, is the wrong market for us. So it's a little bit of a cautionary tale about being really disciplined about where you're focusing and not just going with where the easy money is in the early days.
But especially in the early days, how do you actually know that this is the right market for you? How do you know that you're getting traction and product market fit for that particular market versus what you just said, where it can be this customer's really excited about us, but that shouldn't really be our focus market? Because I feel like it's a bit tricky.
Yeah, and I think there are 2 questions there. One, like, how do you know when you have product market fit? I've looked at this a lot. I've studied this a lot. I've read a lot of people who I think are smarter than me. And my sense is the answer is still, you've got it when you've got it. It's hard to be scientific about it. You've got it when you've got it. There's some metrics you can use, like, how fast sales close and that sort of thing. But I think it's easier to know when you've got product market fit than it might appear. The harder part is the part you're getting at that we're talking about, which is, well, what if you have product market fit with the wrong market, right? And that's where I think it's a little bit of art and science involved. You need to kind of follow your nose a little bit in terms of pursuing opportunities, but always then also taking a step back and just asking yourself, how big is this market? How many other people like this do I think, or how many other customers are there like out there, that have the same need, and it's easy to kind of go into it with your blinders on and sort of not think about those things. And that's really the caution that I'm throwing out there.
Should companies shy away from these sorts of customers?
Well, I think what I say in the book is something like, don't shy away, but be very suspicious, almost go into it assuming that you may be making the wrong move and sort of justify to yourself that this is the right thing to do. Don't just go into it because they're big dollar signs or whatever currency is appropriate for the region you're listening from today. Don't be enthralled by all that.
And then I don't want to monopolize it because I want to hear about your favorites or what you think are quite notorious. But my last one, at least for now, is the right pricing always feels a little bit wrong.
Yeah. So the short version on that one is, in my experience, there are essentially two kind of people at companies, right? One that want to like have all sorts of knobs and dials on the pricing so you can get every last dollar out of the customer based on exactly how they want to use the product. And then there are people who realize, well, that's great, but like it needs to be simple because customers hate complex pricing. We can differentiate if our pricing is simple. So there's like this simple complexity trade-off that companies struggle with. And the reality is, more complex, you get more of the value, but you also tick people off, right? Simple, you make people happier, but you may be leaving a little bit of money on the table. So there's like this struggle between those two. And I always find the right pricing is somewhere in the middle, and you kind of know you're there when the people who like it simple think it's a little too complex, and the people who want to extract every last dollar of the customer think it's a little too simple. So when it feels wrong to everybody, well, that's about where you should be. And so it's a balancing act. That's the point.
How do you go about testing when your pricing is just that right middle ground?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's art and science, right? There's a little bit of, especially at the enterprise level, the good news is usually don't publish all the details of your pricing, so you can refine it a little bit and play with it deal by deal to sort of see what works. And that's probably the art part of it. And the science part of it is, you can lay out some scenarios and kind of say, here are some customers, and here's how much I know they were willing to pay. And, here are all the attributes that would drive the new pricing scheme. Let me see, like if I priced it this way, what would they have paid, And you can kind of compare sort of where you're landing. If you start to say, wow, this really big deal would have gotten really small, that's the wrong answer, right? But if it's like, okay, this big one we could still find a way to get almost all the way there, and these other ones still feel about right. Again, there's sort of a scenario planning approach you can take to that's a little bit more of the science part of it.
And lastly, before I ask you what your favorites are, how do you then define if a customer is getting value out of a particular product?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, again, especially with enterprise SaaS, it's transformative. It's a little bit like business consulting. I think, you can go in and sort of work through with them, what kind of value it's creating, bottom line value, through either higher revenues or more profitability or lower risk or whatever the case may be. I think you can actually calculate it, because it's real science, involved in that. With B2B SaaS, it's probably a little bit more subjective, but again, it all comes back to the theme of what we've been talking about, which is know the customer, talk to the customer, interact with the customer. I mean, they love the successes your products drive as much as you do because, it helps to improve their business and improve their career and whatnot. So, I think you can usually work with them to figure out if it's getting value.
Cool. All right. Now, I wanted to find out, Alan, I'm sure you have a lot more than these 11, but there's a reason why you picked these 11 topics, right? So tell me, which ones are your favorite, or which ones do you think need to be kind of hammered into people a lot more?
Yeah, well, I mean, so first of all, how did I pick these 11? It's actually, if you really thought about it, this is almost like a list of what product marketing does by function. That's the way I started, actually. Then I thought, it's boring, like another list of what product marketing does. Who needs that? Let me see if I can spice it up a little bit. So that's where these lessons came from. But I think the first one is the one that people tend to get the most excited about because, of course, who doesn't like something that says, hey, the CEO should care about your work, product marketers' work, right? But there is a lot of truth in that. And the way I just would summarize it briefly, again, in this kind of speed round mode, is to say, I contend that there's a list of questions. Actually, I've literally got a list of 10 questions that I think product marketers need to have the answers to in order to do good product marketing work. the reality is they're not product marketing questions, they're strategy questions. And so if you don't have clear answers to those questions, then the reality is the company does not have a strategy, and that's a problem. And so that's why I say CEO should really care about product marketing, because if the product marketing is not good at your company, there's a good chance it's not the product marketer's fault. It's the fact that there's not a clear strategy. And that's the CEO's problem to deal with, right? And so of all of them, I think that's the one that gets people to sit up and pay attention more than any of the other ones.
I won't ask you what those 10 questions are, but can you give me like 2 or 3 examples of what questions
Yeah. I
you normally
mean,
ask?
they're the kind of, it's the list about which when people look at it, they sort of say, oh yeah, that's obvious. But then they often don't have good answers to the questions, right? Like, who really is your customer? What do they really care about? What are they trying to change about their business? What makes it hard to change? Well, what do you do to solve that problem? How do you measure the value of what you solve? How is your approach different than other options that are out there? Who else is, solving it with you? All these sort of bread and butter product marketing stuff, which again, CEOs ought to be able to rattle off the answers to these questions very, very quickly, but oftentimes they can't, or the questions are muddy, and that's, where the problem exists.
Can you pick another one that might have a really interesting story? You don't necessarily have to name names or company names.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay. Let's see. Yeah, okay. That one that's got a good story behind it. Well, I mean, look, since we talked about Demandware, I'll give you a story behind the one about personas, right? And again, that's sort of a classic product marketing thing. Personas, which are the kind of the profile of the people you're selling to, right? And like we talked about before earlier, enterprise deals have a lot of buyers, a lot of people involved in the buying process, right? But I contend that there's really only one persona that really matters, and that's the person you need to speak to. And everyone else you kind of speak to relative to their relationship, or, in terms of their relationship to that one buyer. And the story behind that partly is back in the Demandware days, where again, I came in partway through the business's history when we were sort of rethinking the story and, on the sales pitch and all that kind of stuff. And we actually had hired this firm that came in to help us, think through that. And I remember the guy saying to us, like, which persona is the one we want to speak to? And everyone began saying, oh, with these people are involved in the deal. And the guy said, nope, like, pick one. There's got to be one. And we all kind of said, what, are you kidding? We can't pick one. There's a complex B2B enterprise sale. Fast forward, like, in the end, we realized, there really is only one person, that really matters. And that's the person responsible for growth at the e-commerce company. If we can tailor our message to that person, and then, have slightly different variations or little pieces of messages for everybody else, but like really focus on that growth person, then things take off. And I had a sense of that before in my career. That experience really hammered it home. And everything I've seen since then, I believe that's true just about everywhere. There's one persona that really matters. All the other ones are important, but there's one that really matters. So again, some people would disagree. That one's intended to be a little provocative, but that's my contention, and that's the story behind it.
Is this because that person holds the budget or has the most on the line? How do you determine that it's that one person?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just sort of the simple point that someone is the economic buyer, and they're the ones in the end who has to approve the purchase, right? So it's part of it is as simple as that. But also, I think it's partly because it's like junior people who work for them think of their job and what they're doing in terms of how does it contribute to their goals. IT people who partner with them are trying to bring in technology solutions that align with their goals. If they're more senior people than them, they think, I need that person to be successful so our company hits our goals. So there's like this nexus almost of what everybody cares about, around this one person. And if you can communicate to them and sort of talk to everybody else in terms of their relationship to that person's goals, I think everything starts to fall into place.
Do you have any others that you're particularly fond of?
Well, I mean, again, they're all sort of intended to sort of pique people's interest. I think we probably hit the right ones, the best ones. I think the one we already talked about the right messaging being about not the product, but something else is the other one that's a favorite of mine, right? Because I think that's really important, where things get really interesting. So I'm glad we've hit that one already.
And the one thing that I actually wanted to do as a bonus one, because I kind of understand it, but I also wanted to hear what the reason is behind it, is about the product launches, right? Product should be the tail. The tail
should be the product, should be the tail, not the, And the short version of that is a lot of product teams feel like, hey, the minute we've got this thing finished, we should push it out in the market and tell everybody about it. So they want to be the dog wagging the tail of marketing, saying, okay, it's time to launch this. Really, it should be the other way around, which is, hey, in order to get the most traction into the marketplace, we need to time the launch and the announcement and all the building of interest with other things going on in market, other things we're doing. And so we need to pick the right time to launch this. And thus, really product needs to be the tail, marketing needs to be wagging the tail, the launch timing rather than product. Doesn't mean product can't make it available to customers, but it means in order to make a big bang on the marketplace, that's driven by market dynamics, not by engineering schedules.
That's really interesting. I'm also a big proponent of product launches not being the end all and the be all. Most of the companies that I've worked with or worked for has a very much okay, we ship, we launch, and then we kind of just forget about it.
Well, that's right. And that's part of it, right? I mean, that's why, again, launches need to be driven by marketing, not product, in my opinion, is because it has to not only fit into the context of what's happening in the market, but it has to be fit into the context of the follow-on plans to kind of reinforce everything that's been done.
I wanted to end on this note, right? Which might be slightly controversial, but we've already spoken about a few controversial things on this.
Good. Controversy is good. Yeah.
Who owns go-to-market?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Another one of the great debates. I'm going to cop out of that one and say no one really owns it. It is. I'm going to be slightly nerdy here at the end. Actually, my teenagers were here. They'd say, "Slightly, Dad. You're always nerdy." But some economists have a view of companies. They sort of ask the question, "What is a company really?" Right? And there's one economist view that says a company is a collection of contracts. Shareholders have contracts, and directors have contracts, and employees have contracts. It's like contracts that come together. It's just like a bunch of relationships. I think go-to-market is the same thing, right? Which is, what is go-to-market? Well, it's a bunch of sort of people working together, trying to do different things to kind of bring a product to market. And in that sense, there's no real owner of it, because again, it's like this sort of, I don't know what, bees, swarm of bees sort of working together to get something done. Like who owns a swarm of bees, right? No, nobody does, right? They just work together to kind of get metaphor, right? They work together to get something done. I think the same thing's true of go-to-market. Product marketing can be, to use an American sports metaphor, can be the quarterback, trying to coordinate things, right? But quarterbacks don't win games on their own, right? They need everybody else. And sometimes you're the quarterback and sometimes you're playing a different position. So I don't think there's any owner. I know that's a cop-out, but I don't think there's any owner. It's, you have to work. And if there needs to be an owner, then maybe you're all doing something wrong, because you got to find a better way to work together.
I absolutely agree. Before I end the episode, where can people find you, Alan?
EnterprisePMM.com. EnterprisePMM.com. Again, Enterprise GTM was taken, so EnterprisePMM.com is where you can find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and chat soon.
Great. Always a pleasure, Jade. Always a pleasure. Yeah, great chatting with you.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If you liked that episode, please consider subscribing. Read my blog at www.newmarketgtm.com and follow me on LinkedIn under New Market GTM. This is the last episode for the first season of All About GTM. Thank you to everyone who's listened, shared, and commented on the episodes. It truly means a lot. I will be taking a break, as I'll be taking on a new adventure starting today as integrated marketing lead for one of my all-time favorite brands, Monzo. I'm super excited I'd get to finally apply a lot of the lessons I've learned throughout the years and through this podcast at scale. Please check out my other podcast, Evolve Voices, and drop me a line on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. See you for the next season.